Welcome to the Chinese Canadian Museum podcast, The School Room. I'm your host, Melissa Lee, CEO of the museum. Thank you so much for joining us. Today, we're taking a virtual trip across Canada to Montreal Chinatown to chat about the legacy of Wing Noodles. Wings closed down operations last November, but it was the last remaining Chinese food manufacturer in Montreal Chinatown prior to this. We are joined by Vivian Lee Orr and George Lee, whose family ran Wing Noodles. Hi, Vivian. Hi, George. Welcome to the podcast.
Hi.
Thank you for having us.
Let's start from the beginning. Could you briefly introduce yourselves and your relationship to this long-standing family business? Did you grow up with wings as a central part of your childhood?
I'll start. I'm the oldest child of Emily and Sam Lee. Sam is one of the brothers that was the founding set of brothers for the Wing Hinglung in Montreal. I certainly spent a great deal of my growing up time in Chinatown in the factory. My grandmother, so my father's mother, had an apartment in the factory. We would spend our weekends there and we would spend our summers there. It probably wasn't until, late high school, that we started diverging because of other interests and, other things to do. But yes, we spent a huge amount of time down in Chinatown at the factory.
And as for me, my name's George Lee. I'm the son of Samuel Lee, one of the founders of Wing Noodles Limited. I worked up until about 2 years ago, but I can say succinctly that I was working when I was 4 years old in the factory and continued working there continuously for the better part of 50 odd years. Grew up there, played there, ate meals there, ran around Chinatown. That was pretty much my life.
And can you tell us what Chinatown was like back then? I lived in Montreal in the 2000s, and it was, I think, probably quite a lot smaller than when Wing Noodles founded and was first formed. What was the feeling like, and what was it like to grow up in that community?
I considered it was a lot of fun. I mean, you're young, you're curious. You have to understand that most immigrant parents aren't conflicted with the idea of making their kids work. So we all started working when we were 3, 4 years old. We'd be packing cookies or we'd making deliveries and stuff like that. But as long as they fed us, as long as they came, didn't pay us. They just said, "Here, have 10 cents. Go down to the store, get a pop." But yeah, you played there. You played basketball and hockey and football and baseball and tennis. We did everything down. The original shop was actually on Shenanville. I was too young for that, but then we moved to St. Urban, the early 60s, I believe. And then then we were back in the backyard. There was a lot, and we kids just grew up. And at the time, the community was small, but you knew everybody. And that's maybe the difference now and then. We used to know everybody. You walk down, say hello, hi auntie, hi uncle. It may have been small, but it's fairly tight knit.
We lost a huge hunk of Chinatown in the 60s when the government decided to put a huge office building for the Guy Favreau complex basically across the street from where the current Wing Hinglung is. And we had also lost a huge part of Chinatown when they built the convention center. So the Chinatown that we grew up with was probably at least 2 or 3 times bigger than the Chinatown that exists now.
Well, actually, the beginning of that was back in the early 70s. I remember a time when Wings actually put up a pagoda to commemorate Expo 67 on the corner of Legacies and St. Urban. And Mayor Jeppo came and dedicated the park and everything. The most curious thing was that he didn't bring any press. He just brought himself and his driver. And I was always curious about why he did that. Now, I actually happened to have a camera and photographed the whole thing. But I'm pretty sure he knew that he was going to turn down about 60% of Chinatown to put up the new complex. So the Chinatown I grew up in, where everybody knew each other, was pretty much razed to the ground to put up a government building.
Why did your family decide to make noodles and fortune cookies? What was it about that mix or like that decision that you felt was popular for people to eat and buy?
Well, the origin of the noodle business was simply my grandfather started the business as a trading company. And then around the late 1930s, all of a sudden Japan invaded China. You couldn't get any Asian noodles anymore. And he said, geez, what a great idea. Why don't we start making noodles ourselves? So that's basically the origin of the noodle business. You couldn't get noodles from Asia anymore, so you had to make your own.
Yeah, it started off as an importing business. And so when they could no longer import goods from China, rather than go into the restaurant business or into the laundry business, our grandfather took the last $500 that he had and bought used noodle equipment. And that's when they shifted to noodles. This was during that war time when they could no longer import.
So you're referring to the 1931 Japan invading Manchuria and then kind of all during the 30s. I think it was called like the Mukden incident. So that's super interesting. I never knew that that was the genesis of why noodles began to be manufactured domestically in Canada because of geopolitics in Asia. And then what about fortune cookies?
Well, from what I understand, just my uncle just saw that, hey, they're making cookies in San Francisco. Why don't we do that here? So that is pretty much so simple as that, just seeing something else and thinking you can make a go of it here. I think the novelty thing was very important to him. My uncle was the one who wrote all the fortunes. People used to ask me who wrote all the fortune cookies. I said I could tell you, but then I'd have to kill you.
I think we may have already been making almond cookies because I remember we used to make almond cookies by hand. And then eventually we started making almond cookies using machinery. That may have been a case of where we were already doing cookies of one type. And we started doing a second line of cookies, the fortune cookies.
And you were the first manufacturer to have bilingual fortune cookies as well, correct? In English and French?
Well, I mean, it made sense. You were in Quebec and they speak French, so it made sense to have French and English fortunes. The one thing we never did was we never put lottery numbers on the back of our cookies because we saw too many people lose their restaurants gambling in the middle of the night. So we were very much against that. So we actually never put lottery numbers or anything like that on the back of our cookies, on the back of our fortunes.
I never knew those were lottery numbers. Just so you know, I always saw those numbers at the back and I had no idea what they were for.
That's what they're for.
Oh, so you never heard the story about somewhere in the States? There was like this huge run on lottery wins. And the people who were organizing the lottery thought, oh my God, this has got to be a scam. Something's going on. There's just something illegal happening. And they like searched and searched and searched for the common denominator. It was lottery numbers on the back of a fortune cookie.
Wow. So that's how it became popular.
Well, it certainly was popular with whoever won that lottery.
That's amazing. That is part of that history of, I guess, why it's called fortune cookies, where you maybe perhaps could find a fortune in your cookie. Just to talk a little bit about the building, I know Wings is located in a historic building. It's the old British and Canadian school building. Do you know a little bit more about the school's history and what prompted Wings to take over that building?
Well, the reason why we moved was because we actually got expropriated for that government building that tore down half of Chinatown.
Oh.
So we bought that building in 1964 and spent a year fixing it before we moved in. So we actually moved in 1965. And at the time, we actually needed the space anyways because we became the old shop was half the size of that building itself. Later on in the late 1970s, early 80s, we bought the building beside us as well because again, we needed more space. I have to say, during the 60s and 70s, Wings did really, really, really well. Expo 67 and the Olympics were really, really good for Wing Noodles Limited.
And it's really become an anchor building in Montreal Chinatown where people really identify with Wing Noodles, that building, as something that really represents Montreal Chinatown to them. I know I feel that way. Can you tell us a little bit more about what Chinatown means to you personally beyond being a business location?
Well, part of the downfall for Wings probably is the fact that we probably could have and should have moved probably 10, 15 years ago. But there's a connection to Chinatown, and everybody, like I said, it's a cornerstone. Everybody wanted us to be there. As long as we were there, everybody felt Chinatown was okay, everything was safe. Now that we're not going to be there, everybody's sort of worried about Chinatown now. You walked into China, that was the first thing you saw. I guess there's a certain comfort for people knowing that that building's there and it's still working. I mean, the number of people who've come in and said, we're so sorry to see this building go and all this stuff. It's touching, but like I said, life goes on.
It's also a balance of nostalgia and what's right for your own personal family, I think, right? Like, because Wing Noodles as a symbol represented so much in Montreal Chinatown, but then it's also your own family business and what evolves and what makes sense within your own personal family, right? What were some dynamics of that? I think the two brothers were more kind of involved in being the front face of Wing Noodles, but maybe Vivian, could you tell me more about perhaps the women in the family and how they contributed?
Well, I think my grandmother, she was the matriarch of the family. So, my grandfather died when before I was born, I think. So he died probably in 1953, somewhere around there, maybe 54. And my grandmother became sort of like the center of the family, and she was the one who held everybody together until she died at 102. The family lore is that our grandfather, her husband, basically told his children, so that would have been my aunt and her six brothers, that you need to work hard, you need to get an education, you need a profession. Not an unusual thing to say to immigrant children, I must say. But, our family actually did follow those tenets. I should start with my Auntie Jay. She was the oldest, and she was the only daughter, and, she went to school and got a commercial degree and, was the very first Chinese, perhaps even Asian woman to work for, I believe, Sun Life Insurance Company in Montreal at the head office. My uncle Arthur also went to school, and my father, he became a mechanic. And then the next brother, my uncle Howard, became a welder. The next brother, Uncle William, he actually went to university. So it was basically the older siblings working to be able to put the younger siblings to school through university. So Uncle William was the first one who went to university, and he became a mechanical engineer. Uncle Bobby went to university. He became a chemical engineer. And Uncle Buster, who was the youngest son, went and got a business degree over at Concordia University. I remember the story is that my Auntie Jay, because she was the first one, the eldest one, to have a job outside of the family, she would turn her checks over, and her checks were used to buy, you know, small luxury goods for the family. She bought a stove, she bought, radio, things that were beyond the scope of the regular amount of money that the company and the family were bringing in. So, it was also, the brothers would be going to university. But while they were going to university, they would be working at the factory on the weekends and at night, helping to, install equipment, fine tuning the equipment, working on the formulas for the noodles. My uncle Bobby said that, the noodles started off, they were too wet, then they were too dry, and they were too hard, and they were too soft. So it's like it was this scientific testing of the recipes to get them to the point where they became popular acceptable and something then desirable by the Chinese restaurants. So it was always like a family effort. And my grandmother at one point said, we need to diversify. We cannot have all of our children working in this one factory under this one roof. It's just too many eggs in one basket.
Well, it sounds like she was very business minded and lived to 102, right?
Oh, yeah. That's when Uncle Kenneth Lee, who had the business degree, went off to Toronto to start doing a noodle business there because apparently Toronto had been ordering noodles and my God, they also paid cash for them. So they thought this was a good business opportunity. So he went off, and then eventually Uncle Howard joined him in Toronto. And that's when the second Wings opened up in Toronto. And they eventually also spawned the next Wings, which was in Edmonton. And that was like many decades later. But that's how the product has spread across the country, is through basically my grandmother saying, we need to diversify.
And your products are also kosher, correct? As part of the diversification?
They are in Montreal, eh, George?
Or Montreal. They are. I don't believe they are in Toronto or in Edmonton.
So is that a kind of nod to the large Jewish community in Montreal, why that was decided to make that element kosher?
Well, we were very well connected with the Jewish community. Just Uncle Arthur's best friend was Peter Wong, and he was very, very well connected with the Jewish community. Apparently, he actually knew Sam Steinberg himself.
Wow.
I think it was just something, again, something we just decided that this would be a good idea. It was kosherizing the whole plant was 3 days, the three of the worst days of my whole life, but eventually we got it done. And I have to say that the Jewish community has been a very, very loyal customer.
For those that don't know, Sam Steinberg's one of the largest Quebec supermarket chains, Steinberg's, the grocery store founded by his mother. It feels like so many of the stories resonate between family, business, and food. Can you maybe talk a little bit more of how food had a place in your family in terms of gatherings, dinners, birthday celebrations? Are there any kind of really great memories that surround this idea of Chinese food and dishes that you can think of?
I'd have to say that we're a very typical immigrant family, and our family expresses love through food. We ate supper with my grandmother and our aunts and uncles and all our cousins down in the apartment in the factory on the weekends. And during the summer, when we were working in the factory, because like George says, we all worked in the factory, you started off maybe only just dusting, or whatever, but eventually they found something for you to do, whether it was wrapping egg roll skins or answering the telephone or, delivering things into Chinatown. There was always something for you to do. So we spent many, many suppers all together down the factory. And then, after that, we would be free to go play. We'd play out in the parking lot. We'd run around in Chinatown. At that time, there was a park nearby as well, but that's also underneath Guy Favreau. But anyways, so yeah, we spent a huge amount of time in Chinatown with the family having meals. And my grandmother's birthdays were always humongous celebrations. I remember after I got married, I moved out west and I was living either in Saskatchewan or in Alberta. And I was out there for 40 years. And I think my grandmother hit 90. And I said, I need to go back. I need to go back for her birthday because you don't know how long she's going to be here. So it's like every year I'd come back for her birthday, and it went on for another 12 years. So, it was like really an event. And, as the family grew and as the family prospered, the family photos, you can see, it's like the photos just keep getting bigger and bigger because there's more and more people in them. And everybody is like dressed kind of really nice. And it got to the point where, oh my God, they want us to wear tux and they want us to wear evening wear. Holy crow. Okay. But, this was like this is what you did because my grandmother's birthday was a big event and like the candles on the cake, it was like a forest fire. You wonder the icing didn't melt.
So your grandmother's birthday cake, even up to 102, always had the candles. So even when she was 80, they would put 80 candles or 81.
They would get as many as they could on the surface.
And is there a particular dish that you or either of you or both of you associate with these celebrations you could tell us about? Something your grandmother cooked or something that you would always have as a special celebration?
First of all our celebrations were in a restaurant, so it wasn't particularly one that you usually get your standard for Asians to your standard Chinese banquet. So leaf seafood and lobster and chicken and all that stuff. My fondest memories of my grandmother's cooking were more basic things like turnip cake or my grandmother had a specific way of making spaghetti, which I really enjoyed, which was had nothing to do with Italian whatsoever. And she also made a very mean fried rice. And as a kid, that's something you love.
I think that's just really nice, like the special memories that we talk to people about that is a mix of Western and Chinese cuisine. I've been to many Chinese Canadian houses where they do something like Chinese spaghetti, where instead of tomato, it's like with oyster sauce and ground beef and soy sauce. And that feels particularly a kind of mix of Chinese Canadian where we grow up here and then we adapt to our local palates.
Her version of spaghetti was certainly a bastardization of Italian spaghetti. Yeah.
Yes, it involved tomato soup and bacon and cheese.
I mean, that sounds delicious to me.
Oh,
Oh
yeah.
God, it was really good.
Yeah. And of course, it was on Wing's Noodles.
Of course.
Yeah, there was never any Italian pasta there. It was always it was always Chinese noodles.
Given all the extensive history we've discussed, I wonder it must have been a little bit difficult to decide to close Wings. First of all, what was that decision-making process like, and how do you feel now about Wings and the legacy?
Well, in terms of the Wings closing, it probably was coming after the pandemic. We lost a whole lot of our staff during COVID, and replacing that staff was incredibly difficult. You can't replace that sort of experience. And quite frankly, people really don't want to work that hard anymore. I don't think anybody really understands how much work it takes to run a business like that. It's not, you get in at 9, leave at 4 or 5 o'clock. That doesn't happen. It's not happening. The other thing that happens, like I said, is that as with most Chinatowns, they're usually located in the worst part of the city.
Right.
And then the city goes up around it, and all of a sudden becomes one of the most expensive parts of the city. Almost every Chinatown in North America is like that. So with that, your taxes go up and your expenses go up and everything else goes up. And as I said before, we're probably paying a little bit for being loyal to Chinatown and not moving. As I said before, we should have moved about 10, 15 years ago, but we stayed. We were like a corner block of Chinatown, and people really, really noticed us there through all the good and bad times that Chinatown went through. And finally, we had to, like I said, due to, like I said, age, lack of manpower, money, these are all contributing factors to the fact that the shop's closing.
We heard there are plans underway to preserve the building and Wings legacy, headed over by our friends at JA Foundation. Are you involved, or can you tell us more about what's happening there?
I think that we've had interest from many different organizations. JIA is probably the one that's at the forefront, but they're also working with MEM in Montreal, which is a City of Montreal museum that is very, very interested in the history, the oral history and sort of like the immigrant history of people who have been integral part of Montreal. So they have acquired part of the Wings collection. They have added stuff to their collection from Wings. We've also been approached by, of course, the Canadian Chinese Museum and McCord Museum in Montreal. So I think the history will be recorded. The history will be there, and for the future generations, which I think is really a wonderful thing. Whether or not the building itself can be saved, I am not sure because it is very old, and it is really needs a lot of work, just in terms of trying to bring it up to contemporary standards, safety standards, and you need very deep pockets. So I'm hope GIA is able to muster the kind of support that they would need to be able to have the building turned into something in the way of a community center, a cultural center, a place where people can learn and people can gather. And I wish them, a huge amount of luck doing that, but I'm not 100% sure it's going to happen simply because it's a very big project. But these people are very determined. So, yay for them.
I might also mention that the neon sign on Legacies that Wings has had on that street for a long time is going to be reserved by the city, so it's still going to remain there.
Wonderful. Wonderful. That's great news. I think that that is a really key part of the architectural history and of Chinatowns, in particular neon signs like from Wing Noodles. Thank you so much for being on our show, both of you. For all of our listeners in Montreal or planning a trip there this spring, be sure to pay a visit to Montreal Chinatown and Jia Foundation's upcoming exhibition to learn more about Wing Noodles. And if you're planning a trip to Vancouver, be sure to stop by the Chinese Canadian Museum to see our show, Montreal Chinoise, The Lost Decades, The Décennies Perdues, photography from 1945 to 1960s, on view until May 10th. Thank you so much, Vivian and George, for being on our podcast.
Thank you.
Thank you.
This podcast was recorded on the traditional territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples. We invite you all to reflect on the territories that you're on and the host nations and pay respect to their elders, past, present, and emerging. To learn more about the Chinese Canadian Museum and book tickets, visit us at www.chinesecanadianmuseum.ca and follow us on Instagram at ccmuseumbc for updates. The Schoolroom is presented by the Chinese Canadian Museum, hosted by Dr. Melissa Carmen Lee and produced by Rosalie Gunawan. Production is supported by Noah Taylor. The theme music and original audio was created by Joshua Young, and graphic design is by Studio Pian Pian He and Max Harvey. Stay tuned for the next episode of The Schoolroom, available wherever you get your podcasts.